Judicial Watch has been front and center and in the lead, and we've been punished for it by government and by big tech and targeted by the media for standing for clean elections. Next up is some good news. Democracy, and I say democracy, and I know people get triggered sometimes when I use the word democracy. I recognize we're a constitutional republic, but I'm using the word democracy because the left likes to use it. They are pretending that state laws that protect votes from being stolen are somehow anti-democratic. And President Biden the other day said that if the state laws that are in effect now aren't repealed, or he suggested as much, and that the 2022 elections are going to be illegitimate. Now, the presidential spokesman, Jen Psaki, tried to walk that back the next day. But you can go watch Biden's press conference again, read the transcript, and he said it. Now, by the rules of the left, the new rules, he was attacking democracy. He was inciting the overthrow and rejection of our elections. So the new left's rules are that that is impeachable and he should be subject to criminal investigation. Now, obviously, I don't think it's impeachable. Obviously, I don't think he should be subject to criminal investigation, for that at least. But it's exactly what they're doing to Donald Trump. They want to put him in jail for saying the same things that Joe Biden has said. And in fact, they already impeached him for doing exactly what Joe Biden is doing, which is undermining the faith and confidence in the elections. Thankfully, despite Joe Biden's anger and yelling about this election bill that the left was trying to ram through the Senate, it was stopped. And it was stopped, I'm sure, in no small measure, to people thanks to people like you, who, if you were paying attention, I'm sure you were calling your senators, calling your members of Congress to oppose this. Now, what the left was doing is that they were trying to change election laws through federal law that would have resulted in states essentially having their elections run by, a federal agency or the Justice Department. So imagine having the CDC or people like that running your elections in your hometown. That would have been the potential result of these bills. They would have eviscerated voter ID. They would have required unsecure mail-in balloting schemes that would have required votes to be counted days and weeks after they were after election day. Some crazy stuff. And they would have provided oversight opportunities to the anti-democratic left to undermine democracy. So every time you heard voting rights bill, you should substitute that word, because the fight isn't over. You should substitute voter fraud bill, because the bills make it easier to commit voter fraud. Now, voter ID laws, to the extent they exist in certain states, and not enough states have them, and a lot of them aren't even strong enough in the states that do, they would have been severely weakened, if not subject to being thrown out entirely, once the left got its litigation hands on them through the new processes and new legal requirements that would have been put in place by this federal takeover of our election systems. But they lost. A majority of the Senate refused to buy it. And Senator Sistema and Senator Manchin were the two Democrats who prevented the filibuster rule from being changed in a way that would have allowed this bill or bills to get through by mere majority votes. Now, I've always run hot and cold on the filibuster. It's not in the Constitution. It's a rule of the Senate. But generally speaking, one way to think about the filibuster, which I find mostly persuasive, is that the filibuster is a way of restraining government. It makes it harder for the government to do things. And this is a good example of that. And surely the left understands that, because in my view, it's never really been about the filibuster. It's been about getting rid of institutions that get in the way of their power grabs. I keep on reminding people we are in a revolutionary period. We have the rising communists controlling the party that's controlling our federal government by and large, who are seeking to decimate the institutions that they've been entrusted with by the American people. So this is why you hear the left not only oppose the filibuster, but they oppose the very idea of the U.S. Senate that was created by our constitutional system. They're already trying to destroy the House of Representatives. Look at Pelosi's January 6th rump committee. The new theory is that all the Republicans who question the elections should be thrown out and kept out of Congress or jailed. So you've got the Democratic left in this town and in the states and their allies outside trying to jail 100+ Republican politicians in Congress in one fell swoop, or keep them out of office completely for daring to pursue constitutional and federal remedies under law related to election challenges. As I warned you last week, they've now expanded their scope to include the social media postings of potentially millions of Americans. I mean, they're not just targeting Trump, they're targeting you potentially, certainly if you've been posting stuff online. So this election fight is almost always about things other than what they say they're about. It's about undermining elections. It's about undermining campaigns. I mean, it's my view, given the attack and the changes to the rules that they've been promoting, the left is antagonistic to the very idea of elections. I mean, if you have an election that goes over the course of weeks and months, ballots counted over the course of weeks and months, as opposed to, quote, an election day where people show up to vote and people ascertain that the actual people who are voting are who they say they are and are eligible. They want to end elections as we know it. And what better way to slide through candidates they support in order to obtain, retain, and expand power than to have an election that goes on for weeks and months that no one can fairly monitor because it's just happening all the time. It's like they're having a rolling survey or poll, and all of a sudden you've got someone who, quote, won. So Judicial Watch has been front and center and in the lead, and we've been punished for it by government and by big tech and targeted by the media for standing for clean elections. But we're not backing down. In fact, we testified, my colleague, Judicial Watch senior attorney Russ Noble, testified just this week in the House on election integrity and reform. I think they've had now 7 hearings on that, the left has, in the House. And Judicial Watch, I think this is now our 4th. If you include mine, I think it's our 5th since 2020, testifying to the House in support of clean elections or to the Senate. And Russ was there, and I encourage you, we'll post the testimony later. Encourage you to watch it. Well, first of all, it's all on Zoom, which is necessarily objectionable. In fact, one of the members, Hank Johnson, an extremist from Texas, he was doing the hearing from his car or a car. How do you like that for the way government's working these days? But Russ made the point that one of the big lies out there is that these election security issues or security measures, such as voter ID, that 80% of the country support, has nothing to do with suppressing the vote. In fact, minorities that allegedly are the target of these voter suppressions, their turnout is increasing dramatically. And so much so that they're increasing, that the minority turnout is better in the bad southern states with these restrictions that are supposedly so suppressive than they are in the old northern states and northeastern New England states. Voter ID encourages participation in the elections because when you reassure people that their vote is more likely to be counted fairly and honestly and not canceled out, potentially by voter fraud, people are more likely to participate. That's why these rules are important. And the courts have already found that you don't need to prove voter fraud, that there's an interest in making sure and reassuring voters that the elections are being run in a fair and honest way and in a way that reasonably prevents fraud. Because if they're not, people won't participate. And secondly, the other big issue that Judicial Watch remains involved in, and we've been pursuing, as I've been telling you, is cleaning up election rolls. There's a new poll out by Rasmussen. So it's 80% in favor of voter ID, 85% in favor of cleaning up election rolls. I mean, you wouldn't know that from the fights we've had in courts throughout the land against the extremist left who come in and tell us it's the worst thing you could possibly do, which is to take people who aren't supposed to be on the rolls off the voter rolls so there are lesser opportunities for fraud. They oppose that. So rather than support voter ID, rather than support cleaning up the rolls, rather than supporting reforming our election systems to make sure that only eligible citizens are voting, President Biden and his allies on the left have decided to engage in what I call the great defamation. I think this period in history will be seen as be called two things, or at least ought to be called two things: the Great Suppression, the censorship we've all been suffering under, and the Great Defamation, which is the media, governmental, big tech smearing of those who defend the rule of law and those who want clean elections. And this president has compared those who want voter ID, 80% of Americans, you're just like Bull Connor. He tried to say he didn't say that, but he did say that. You're just like a racist if you support voter ID. 80% of you. No wonder that bill didn't pass with rhetoric like that. So we've got the litigation to clean up the rolls ongoing in 3 different states. We've highlighted in California and Oregon and New York 12 million names among those jurisdictions. New York City specifically, some big counties in California and big counties around Portland and Central Oregon. I think there's about 12 million names. And you know how many names they've removed under the law? 33. That doesn't mean they're not removing dead people here and there. It just means they're not removing hundreds of thousands of other names they're supposed to be removing to clean up the rolls. And the American people want it done. This Justice Department is corruptly run. And the leftists there don't want to enforce the law requiring states to take reasonable steps to clean up the rolls for the reasons that you might, in my view, that the left doesn't want. They want insurance. They want extra names on the rolls to misuse them to vote illegally, I think, from time to time. Why else would you be opposed to it? And so Judicial Watch is doing the heavy lifting virtually alone on this to clean up the rolls, and we're doing it successfully. California already, LA County, in a settlement from last a year or two ago, they saw we were right. They hadn't cleaned up the rolls in LA County and California generally for 20 years, and they settled with us. And LA County's in the process of removing up to 1.6 million names from their rolls. So we're having success. There's still a lot of work to be done. As I say, voter ID, in many states is non-existent. Here in Washington, D.C., I now need a vaccine card and a voter ID to sit at a lunch counter, which is outrageous and anti-constitutional. But I don't need a voter ID to vote. So they support requiring an ID of Americans, and in the case, literally, a photo ID to eat, but not to vote. And I don't know about you, but I think the right to vote and your vote is important enough to protect, in the least, with a voter ID requirement. And I mean photo ID, not like a bank statement or, pieces of paper, a secure photo ID. So I'm glad we're testifying this week, but the point and what the testimony shows, or the fact the hearing took place, is just because they lost in the Senate, everyone says the bill is dead. They're never going to stop pushing for the attacks on election integrity they want to get into place as long as they're controlling Congress. I mean, I wouldn't stop if I were them. This is the thing. It's like, what would you do? Let's say you had a policy proposal and it failed. I mean, would you just give up and stop? No. So the left isn't going to stop. The left isn't going to stop, and as evidenced by this hearing the other day. And so Judicial Watch is educating Congress. We're in federal court suing to clean up the rolls. In Maryland, we're suing over that abusive gerrymander, which is an outrageous abuse of power that, as you've seen some of these crazy gerrymandered maps. I mean, it's just incredible, all the work we're doing. And someone's got to do it, and we're proud to be able to do it. And as I remind everyone, or I try to remind you from time to time, we're only able to do it because of your support. And I encourage you to continue supporting Judicial Watch if you value your right to vote.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.